Okay. So we're part of the way into Galatians chapter 4. Picking up in Galatians chapter 4, verse 8. And this is kind of a really interesting place to start today. I really like Galatians 4:8. It's a really fun verse. However, at that time when you did not know God, you were slaves to those things which by nature are no gods. So again, my background, particularly the thing that I'm, I guess the field of study that I'm most intrigued by is theistic metaphysics. And that branch of philosophy deals with the nature of God, like what exactly is God? And it's interesting to me because a lot of times Christians don't really stop and think about that. And when you don't have a good conception of what God is or what God is like, then you don't really have, it hampers your Christian worship, okay? If your conception about God is wrong, you may find yourself worshiping an idol and not actually God. Now, I don't think that having a perfectly accurate view of God is essential, and the reason why I say that is because I don't think that we as finite creatures are capable of having a perfectly one-to-one correspondently accurate view of God. Does that make sense? God is an infinite and eternal being, is so far beyond and above us that it is impossible for us to have perfect and complete comprehensive knowledge of the infinite God. So when somebody has a view of God that is less than biblical, there's a sense in which, like, well, isn't all of our view of God kind of not quite all the way there? Does that make sense? So I'm not excusing having sloppy concepts about God, but I am acknowledging that we can't have perfect concepts about God. And the way that that's described in philosophical terms, you guys ready for a fun word? We can't have quiddative knowledge about God. We went over quiddity, didn't we, the other day? Okay. So you guys are all totally familiar with that word? It's a regular word you use in your vocabulary all the time.
You can explain it again.
It is impossible for us as creatures. Can I erase this?
Yeah.
Oh, why don't we just do this for now? Yeah, I'm like, wait, what is this? It almost looks like my handwriting. Yeah. It's bad enough to be my handwriting. Okay. Quiddity, or my hand got ahead of my brain there. The whatness of a thing. It's a Latin term. The whatness of a thing, quiddity. So we cannot have direct quiddative knowledge about God. We don't actually know God's essence directly. We can make judgments about God's essence, but we can't directly know God's essence, specifically through experiencing. As an immaterial being, our material physical senses don't have access to God's immaterial reality. Your sense of sight can see, but it can only see physical things, right? You can't see things that are not physical. Your sense of touch can feel things, but it can only feel physical things. Your sense of hearing can only hear audible physical sounds. Your sense of taste can only taste physical things. So all of our physical senses are geared to experience physical things. Does that make sense? And God is a non-physical entity. There's no physicality to God at any point, right? So our physical senses do not have access to the quiddative nature of God, what God actually is in his essence. Does that, are we on the same page so far? Okay. So I'm going to go through a series of verses because the Bible bears all of this out really well. We're going to go through a whole series of verses that kind of explain the difference between a real God and a false God. There's a long-standing joke that one of the best questions you can ask on a Bible college application is define God and give 2 examples. How many gods can there be in essence or in reality? You can only have one God, okay? Now, we're going to get into a really technical distinction here. And so if you're prone to not enjoy technical or philosophical distinctions, now would be a really good time to get a cup of coffee or use the bathroom or take a quick nap. You're welcome to it. But if you are inclined to be interested in more technical distinctions, then this might be for you. Okay. We divide things up into categories, right? That's how we understand our world. Okay. It is important to understand that God is not one being in the category of that which is God. Okay? He's not, as they would say in philosophy, an instantiation of being God. Okay? So it's not like, here's the category of all things that are God, and inside of that category is the Father. Or God. Okay? He's not a specific instance of being God. Now, this is why this gets really important. If God were a member of a genus or a category, okay, if God were a member of a genus or a category, even if he were the only member of that category, that's by accident that he's the only member. There could be others, even though there's actually only one. Okay? So God can't belong in a category. Okay? There is no box that you can draw around God that he fits within. Does that make sense? So God is not the member of a category or a distinction. Like kind of how, if we back it out and think about I have a dog at home, and it is arguably the best dog of all dogs. Doesn't matter, mine's better. Just saying. Her name is Daisy, and she is absolutely the sweetest, and I love her to pieces. Daisy is an instance of dogness, right? She is a specific example of being a dog. And even if she were the only dog that existed in the entire world, there could be other dogs. She just happens to be the only dog. Does that make sense? So even if there is only one God, if God is a member of a category, there could be others. Okay? Now, here's how we know that there can't be others that are also God. Okay? One of the categories that we say that God has, or one of the attributes of God, is infinite. Okay? God is infinite. If there were 2 infinites, you would have to be able to differentiate between them. Okay? If you could differentiate between 2 infinites, one would have to have some attribute, characteristic, quality, or thing that the other does not possess. If the other does not possess or lacks something, is it infinite? Okay, so the Eleatic school of philosophers, and if you want to look that up, it's the school of Elia, and it was famous for 2 people in particular. Zeno and Parmenides were 2 very famous Eleatic philosophers, and they posed a series of paradoxes that they believed proved a thought or a system called monism. And we're not going to get into all of monism, but their theories are interesting and they're helpful in understanding God to a degree. They were totally crazy and wrong, but their but their paradoxes help us understand other things beyond what they're trying to prove with them, okay? So the paradoxes of Zeno in particular, if you're traveling a distance, right, from point A to point B, in order to get from point A to point B, you have to first go halfway, right? Everyone agrees? You can't get from A to B without traveling through the 50% point. That sets up a new distance. So this is A2. So to get from point A to point B, you have to first travel halfway. And that sets up a new distance, A3. To get from point A to point B, you have to travel halfway. And then halfway, and then halfway, and then halfway, and then halfway. So what he's trying to point out is that you have an infinite distance to traverse from point A to point B. You can't ever get from point A to point B because you always have to go halfway first. And if you're always only going halfway, you never actually get there. Okay? So he's trying to show that in order for two things to differ, they have to either differ in being, right, in that they are, but being is the very thing that they have in common. Can they differ in the one way in which they're both the same? No. If they both exist, existence can't be the thing that they have that separates them, because they both have it. So the only way they could differ is by non-existence, things that they don't have. But non-existence, to differ by no existence or no thing, is to differ by nothing. And so if there's nothing that differentiates you, are you different? No. Right? So they can't differ by being, because being is the same thing that they both have. And they can't differ by nothing, because to differ by nothing is to not differ at all. So Zeno is trying to demonstrate that A and B are really the same thing, so all of reality is one. Now, he was pulling in a thread that was really interesting and is true of God. It's not true of reality. So just to solve this riddle really quickly, what he proved isn't that the distance is infinite. He proved that the distance is infinitely divisible. Mathematically, you can always take this distance and divide it by 2. That's all he proved. He proved that mathematically you can always just divide by 2, not that the distance itself is actually infinite. Okay, so he confused math and reality, unfortunately, which doesn't always work. Math helps explain reality, but it doesn't translate directly to reality. Okay? But when you start looking at God, if God is really actually infinite, okay, because that's what Zeno is trying to show. He's trying to show that this is an infinite set, and it's not. But if God really is infinite, then Zeno's paradox actually applies. If you have two infinites, they have to differ by existence or non-existence. And if they differ by existence, that's the one thing they both have in common, because if you have one that exists and one that doesn't, you really only have one, right? So if you have a God that exists and a God that doesn't exist, how many gods do you actually have? Just one. So you don't have to worry about the one that doesn't exist. You can forget about that one. That one's make-believe. But if you really have two gods that both exist and they're both infinite, they have to differ in some way. And they either differ by being, which is what they have in common, which makes them the same, or they differ by non-being, which is to differ by nothing, which means they don't differ at all, which means that they are the same. So how many gods can you actually have? How many gods is it possible to exist in reality? You can only have one actually infinite God. Now, here's the catch. A God that is not infinite is a created being, not an uncreated being. And God, by definition, is the uncreated creator, not the created. So anything that's created or derived can't be God. Okay? We're going to get to that in a second, okay? And there's a whole slew of verses we're going to go through. But by nature, because that's what Paul's saying here, you did not, so at that time when you did not know God, you were slaves to those which by nature, as to their essence, their essential nature, they're not actually gods. You worship them as a God, but as to their essence or their nature, can you have more than one God by nature? The answer has to be no. You can only have one actually infinite eternal being. You can't have two. It doesn't work. Okay? Now, here's another way to get to the same conclusion, and this way is maybe almost sort of cheating. I'm going to erase this. The word, so we believe that God is infinite, right? We all believe this? We all agree? Well, the word infinite really means not finite or countable. Not finite or countable. So if you have a thing, now, okay, bless you. There is a huge difference mathematically and philosophically between incomprehensibly large and actually infinite. Now, how many snowflakes are outside right now? How many individual snowflakes are outside? The number of real snowflakes just outside right now is incomprehensibly large. We say, oh, you could never count that. Not because the ability to count it doesn't exist, but because the ability to count it is beyond our means to do. We need a bigger boat, right? Isn't that the line? The ability to count it is beyond our means, but it's not technically impossible. It's just beyond our capacity. Okay, so we would analogously say, oh, it's an infinite amount of snowflakes. There's just infinite snow, but we don't actually mean that. We mean that by analogy, not by reality. Okay, so we're talking about something that's incomprehensibly large, because if you can count one snowflake, in theory, you could count all of them. Does that make sense? If you can count one, you can count all of them. So when we say that God is infinite and not countable, we don't mean that the number of parts to God, I'll get to you in 1 second, okay? We don't mean that the number of parts to God are so many that you couldn't ever count all of them. We mean that there are no parts to God that could be counted at all. Okay, and that gets into the next doctrine, which is simplicity. God is simple. He's a complete unified whole. And this is where it gets weird, okay? So we think of this as God is one, but even that is a countable number, right? And so God isn't actually one. He's what's called a whole. He's an undivided, unified whole. And the only way we can think about that is with the number one, but that's not actually accurate. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I would say, when you counter that by saying it may not be countable, but it can be measurable, meaning water is not countable, but it is measurable.
Where in the Bible does it say that God is measurable?
It doesn't, but I'm just saying for this argument's sake that countable allows for alternative.
But measuring is a means of counting. So you're really just using the same word two different ways. So you're saying God's not really countable, but he can be counted because measurement is a means of counting something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you're measuring volume, which is you're counting the amount of volume.
Because the whole, like water, the whole ocean, it's one thing.
Yes.
But then you can measure the ocean.
But that's why I'm saying God is analogously like, but not identical to. So we have concepts of what it means to be unified whole, but God extends beyond those concepts. They're analogously similar, but they're not identical.
Okay.
So God is a unified whole, but even the ocean as a unified whole is divisible, right?
Yeah.
You could take a cup and scoop out some of the ocean, right? You could splash droplets of water out of the ocean, right? When a wave breaks, it creates mist, which is parts of the ocean that are scattered. God can't be broken into parts like that. He's a undivisible unified whole. The ocean is a unified whole, but it is still divisible. So again, these are all analogous predications. These are things that you can analogously say about God, but none of them are a one-to-one corresponding ratio. Okay? Because if it were a one-to-one ratio, it wouldn't be analogy, it would be univocity. It would be univocal. Are you guys familiar with those terms? Univocal, equivocal, and analogy? Yes? Should we go over univocity, equivocation, and analogy? Okay, I'm going to erase all this. I don't know if this is what you guys were expecting when we started Galatians, but this is where my mind lives all the time. Okay? Yes.
Question, I don't know fully how to explain this question, but when you say that God's not divisible, that makes sense. But at the same time, I also think about how we all have the Holy Spirit within us, but I don't think we only have like a part of the Holy Spirit. How does that work?
We experience God, but that doesn't make God divisible. So you can stand outside in the sun. Does that mean you have all of the sun? Yeah. So we are finite, so we're only capable of what we're able to receive. God is infinite. And if God put his infinite presence in you, that's too small of a container to contain too large of a package, right? So we're by participation experiencing what we're able to. That's not the fullness of God in his entirety. It's the fullness of God in your capacity. So if you put a sponge, right? Not like a kitchen sponge, but like the sponges that grow in the water. The sponge is in the ocean. Fair? Yeah. But the ocean is in the sponge. Fair? The sponge is in all of the ocean, but is all of the ocean in the sponge? Because the sponge isn't big enough to hold all of the ocean, but the ocean is certainly big enough to hold all of the sponge. So you are in God, and God is in you, and you can be in all of God, but can all of God therefore also be in you? No. But does that mean that God is therefore divided? No, it means that you have limited capacity to experience. So the delimitation doesn't exist in God, it exists in you. You're the delimiting factor there, not God. Does that help?
Yeah, that does.
Okay, so I'm thinking of the way the word breaks down. Equivocation or equivocal and... Okay, so univocal, again, we're breaking it there, and equivocal. Uni means one, equa means equal or same. So in univocal predication, you're using the same word the same way exactly. Okay, now a really good example of this is if I were saying that I was in the attic at the building and there was a bat flying around my head, so I hit it with my bat. The word bat there actually, no, sorry, that's a better example of I'm switching things. So that would be equivocation. I've equivocated the word bat. I used the same word, but I meant two totally different things, right? That's equivocating a term. So if on the one hand, when I said bat, I meant a flying mammal, like a small rodent. And then the second time I said bat, I meant a stick that you would use to hit something, like a baseball bat, right? Sorry, I got those switched really quickly. Univocal, though, is the same word used in the exact same way. So if I were to say that Snoopy is a dog and Pluto is a dog, right? Those are both examples of dogs. So dog is used univocally in that sense. They both mean the same exact thing. And now you understand this. You use language like this all the time. You just don't know the technical terms. So if you were to say, George Washington was a man, what do you mean by that? He was a male human, right? But if you were to say that, like, Drew Brees in football, he's the man, are you saying that he's a male human? No, you're implying that he's particularly good at something, right? So you're using that word equivocally. You're equivocating the word man there. Does that help? So you guys are starting to understand this? Sort of, yeah. Now, but when you get into analogous predication, okay, when you're dealing with analogy, the best way I can think to explain this is what's called analogia entis, or the analogy of being. And here's the best way I can think to explain this. I can say that, I'll use my wife as an example. My wife is healthy. What I mean by that is she is possessing good health. There's no illness or deficiency in her in that sense. Okay, my wife is healthy. But then I can say running is healthy. Is running properly in possession of no deficiency and good health? No, but running is conducive to you having good health, right? It provides or it causes health in you, or it maintains health in you. So there's a similarity, right? There's a relationship between my wife being healthy and running being healthy. And then I can turn around and say, hey, that was a really healthy salad. That word healthy, so the salad communicates, or it gives to you, it funds health in you by providing nutrients. So it's healthy for you, not in the same way that running is, and it's healthy not in the same way that my wife is, but that word health, there's a corresponding reality between all three of those things, where health actually does have a similar meaning across all three of those examples. And that would be the analogy of being. And that my wife is being healthy. Running it's something that is or is being healthy for you. And a salad is, and then the implied word is being healthy. So all those things are being healthy. But they're being healthy in different ways, but they're all analogously related. Is it equivocal, meaning healthy means the same thing across the board? No. Is it univocal, meaning healthy means totally different things every time I use it? No. It's analogous, meaning that healthy has a similar meaning that's correlative. It's connected. There's a connectedness of the meaning there. There's a simile or something similar between all three of those uses of the word healthy. So when I say something like God is love, that is not equivocal. When I say love, I don't mean something different than when I say my wife and I love each other. I'm not meaning something different than that, but it's also not univocal, because my finite, temporary, discursive love for my wife is not the same thing as God's infinite, eternal love for me. But there is a similarity that ties the two together. So we can meaningfully say things about God and his nature, but only by means of analogy, not by univocity or equivocation. Are we all on the same page? Because this is all really, really important stuff, because we say things about God and they actually have real meaning. It really means something about God, but it doesn't mean something univocally, because how can finite language that communicates finite concepts and ideas, how can that adequately, accurately, and comprehensively contain or explain the infinite God? You can't do it, right? So what you can do is you can say, God is love, and I know what finite love is, but God is love in that direction on into infinity. Does that help? It's not like God is love and I know what love is, but God's love is something else over here and I don't know what it is. That's not how that works. And it's also not God is love and I know what love is, so God's love is equal to my love. That's also not how it works, right? So that's where you get into, when you're dealing with theology of any kind, the second you start talking about God, the only way you can do it, and you have to understand this, the only way you can say anything about God that actually has any real, legitimate meaning is by means of analogy. Because anything univocal you say has to be wrong, because it's finite language trying to communicate an infinite idea. Can't do it. If it's equivocation, then you don't even know what you're talking about anymore, because the word doesn't mean what it means. It means something different, right? if you're equivocating and you say God, that you could mean devil, and the word's equivocated, it doesn't matter anymore. But by analogy, you can say something that has legitimate meaning, but strips away the problems with human language. And so we're thinking analogously about God, but not identically. Okay. Are we all on the same page?
Could you give like a short definition for equivocation?
Equivocation is to use the same word with two completely dissimilar meanings. So like the bat flying around the sky and the bat that you use to hit a baseball, you're equivocating the word bat. Bat means it's the same word, but it means two different things. So if God is love and I'm equivocating, love when you're talking about God means something totally different than love when you're talking about people. And you don't know what you're talking about anymore. It doesn't have the same meaning, so you don't even know what you're saying. So if knowledge about God is only equivocal, you don't know anything about God. God is totally unknowable to you. Does that seem like what the Bible is communicating? God exists, but he's totally unknowable. Don't even try to think about him.
It doesn't feel like it's totally what it's saying, but we can't know him entirely.
That's why I'm arguing for analogy, because he's other, but he's not so other that there's no point of reference. So equivocation isn't true, but we also know that univocity can't be true. And so the medieval scholastics called this the tetram quid, or the third thing. Okay, remember that word quiddity? So tetram would be third. Quid is the whatness. So it's the third what, or the third thing. The tetram quid, it's the third way of understanding God. So if you're ever reading like a scholastic book and they refer to the tetram quid, they're usually referring to analogy, which is the third way of understanding God. Just in case. Okay, any questions about this before we get back to Galatians chapter 4, verse 8? Are you guys stoked that we took the sidetrack? Or are you guys like, please don't ever do that again? No. Metaphor and analogy are very synonymous. They're very similar. So there is technical distinctions between them, but they're close enough that they're used interchangeably.
I know, I just wanted to tease you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I can erase all this? Okay.
I have to use my years as an English major for something, or else it's useless.
Well, but you also have to understand, too, that metaphor in the context of literature, and it's when you talk about analogy in literature, it's not that word is equivocated in philosophy. It carries with it a different connotation in philosophy. So in literature, yes, that's not properly what analogy means. But in scholastic medieval metaphysics, this is what analogy means. So we're equivocating the term and using it in a different way here.
I figure as much. I don't know
Yeah.
how to say it.
Okay. All right, so I want to run through with you guys a whole host of verses that are adjacent to or tied to Galatians chapter 4, verse 8. However, at that time, when you did not know God, you were slaves to those which by nature, as to their essential reality, were not actually God's. So, turn with me to 1 Chronicles 16. There's going to be a lot of back and forth here. 1 Chronicles 16, verses 25 and 26. For great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. He is also to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the peoples are idols. They're acknowledging that there are other quote-unquote gods that people worship, but then they immediately turn around and say, yeah, except those gods are just idols. They're not real. They're just idols. 1 Chronicles 16, 25 and 26. 1 Chronicles 15, verses 25 and 26. And then he stipulates, he clarifies, the Lord, the real God, created the heavens. So the idolatrous worshiped gods that are not God by nature, they are created entities, but the real God is a creative entity. Now, okay, do you guys want to really like just mess with your heads and this will like ruin you for the rest of your life and you'll spend the rest of your life like trying to untangle this knot? Okay. God created the heavens and the earth ex nihilo, out of nothing. Okay, now this is the philosophical problem. This is the puzzle that I spend hours trying to untangle, and I still don't quite get it. God didn't create out of himself, right? It's not ex deo. He didn't create out of pre-existing matter. It's not ex materia. He created out of nothing, ex nihilo. Now, this is where it gets really wild. God is pure act with no potential. So there's no potential within him that he could draw upon to produce something that doesn't already exist. He has no latent potential within him. So the potentiality for the world that wasn't and then was didn't come from God. But nothing has no potential either, because there's nothing there to have potential. So the act of creation had no prior potentiality that it actualized. The act of creation, the existence of creation, had no prior potential that was actualized in creation. So there's something, and this is where I get lost, okay? There is something about the pure actuality of God that is so potent, so strong and powerful, and getting into God's omnipotence. There's something so potent about God's pure actuality that it has the ability to actualize that which has no potential to be actualized. That messes with my mind. Because when we observe the world, all we see is something that is potential being actualized. Okay? So you've eaten an apple. That apple had the potential to be eaten, but there was an apple there first that had the potentiality to be eaten. You can't eat an apple that's not there. You can't actualize the potential of eating the apple when there is no apple to begin with. But like even in that act, nothing was done, right? So God took nothing that had no potential and actualized creation out of it. Like, what the actual heck? Something about God's pure actual, and so when you see the Bible saying things like, well, all the other gods, they're idols, but God made the heavens. Let's see the idols do that.
Can you write the terms that you used on the board?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't even know how to spell this. Xdeau. So ex nihilo is so God created ex nihilo. This is how he did it, out of nothing. Because if he did it out of himself, then he can change. He can take some of him and make something else out of him. So God would have parts and he would be mutable. So ex deo can't work. Okay? Ex materia means that God made it out of pre-existing matter. But how could matter exist prior to its own existence for God to make matter out of matter? You see how that doesn't work? It's logically impossible. You can't exist prior to your own existence in order to be the cause or the fund of your own existence. So if God created matter, but he made matter out of pre-existing matter, well, the matter was already there. He didn't make it. That would make matter co-eternal with God. And can you have two infinite eternals? We already covered that, right? You can't. That doesn't work. So ex deo can't work, and ex materia can't work. You can only have ex nihilo. But then the other problem that you run into philosophically is nothing has no potentiality, so it can't have the potential even to be made. So there's something about God's pure actuality that is so potent that it can actualize that which has no potential in itself. Which that, again, like, I can't wrap my head around that. And you can't argue that didn't happen, because here we are. Yes?
We're kind of curious why it can't be out of God.
Why it can't be out of God?
Yeah.
Because then God would have to have parts, because part of God was changeable into part of something else. So God would have to both be composite and he would have to be mutable or changeable. If he's changeable, there's a before, a during, and an after which the change occurred, which puts God in time, which makes him not eternal. You see this cascading problem that you run into, where like you pull that thread, now all these other things fall apart. If God has parts, then anything that is made of parts can come apart, can be dissolved. And in order for something to be made of parts, it has to have something external to and before it to compose it into its current form. So like a Toyota Camry is made of parts, right? But you need someone else to fund cohesiveness in the Toyota Camry and put it all together. The parts don't explain their own cohesion. So if God is made of parts, he needs a composer that composed the parts together. And that makes him not God.
Yeah, it does kind of fall apart.
To use your phrase, the parts will fall apart. If you're made of parts, you can be dissolved. You can be taken apart. So God can't be made of parts. He has to be, and remember we covered God's simplicity. He has to be a unified whole, not one. One works, but it's wrong. He's not one singular thing. He's a unified whole that's not countable. Okay? And so God can't be, the universe that we exist in can't be made out of God, because then it would be part of that which has no parts.
That was very helpful.
Yeah. Yes. We're one verse in, guys.
So you said, we know that God exists outside of time,
Yes.
but that does not mean he exists outside of sequence or chronology.
Yes, it does. Because chronology of any kind or sequencing of any kind, so before, during, and after are chronologically bound words. And they're also words that demand mutable or mutation. But if God can't change, then there can't be a before, during, and after which the change occurred.
How do you explain eternity?
The
Exist in it. We will not become.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. So God is not in eternity as if it's a box that he's within. It's not a larger thing that God is then contained by. Because he can't be contained, right? So we don't say that, we use the language, God is in eternity. And the Bible even talks about God being in eternity. He dwells in eternity, okay? But when you break that down and you actually philosophically explain it, what it's really saying is God is, as to his nature, eternal. So there was a first century Roman Christian philosopher named Boethius. Boethius. Huh? Boethius was a Roman senator that was accused of sedition and executed. But while he was in prison awaiting his execution, the accusation was false, but he got killed for it anyway. While he was awaiting execution in his prison cell, he wrote a book called The Consolation of Philosophy. And it's a fascinating read. I highly recommend you read The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius.
I'm trying to think prison is just the key to good writing, because all the good books we have are from people getting in prison.
You should just go to jail.
I know.
Why are you not arrested yet? I'm just kidding. Okay. But in Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, he talks about the eternity of God, and he makes some really keen observations. Some of the most standard understandings of God's eternal nature come from Boethius' reflections in prison. Okay? So if you want to know more about God's eternality, it's like towards the end of the book. So you're going to read for a while and be like, what is this guy talking about? It's not even in here. It is, but it's near the end.
Is this the guy who said that thing about the Trinity that we were supposed to quote? You guys remember? I had it in my doctrinal paper. Yeah, he was defining the Trinity. Did he talk on the Trinity in that book?
Boethius? Not directly, no, but he does have a tract on the Trinity. And so Boethius has a tract on the Trinity, which is also really good. And then Thomas Aquinas has a commentary on Boethius' tract on the Trinity, which is also really good. But probably one of the best works on the Trinity is going to be Augustine's tract on the Trinity. But that's like 400 pages. But Augustine's work on the Trinity is really good. But what you're probably referring to is the Athanasian Creed. Probably, maybe. It might be
Do you feel like we had a
the Nicene Creed.
name as Boethus?
Probably the same guy.
I don't remember exactly what it was about Boethus.
Looking it up right now.
Boethius.
Boethius, just potato.
Individual substance of rational nature.
Yes. I would have a hard time with the word substance.
He also put in quotation marks being.
You see, I would take being over substance. Substance has different connotations that I would object to. But I do know that word is sometimes used, but I think it's sloppy. Okay, but back to all of this. So God created ex nihilo, not ex deo, and not ex materia. So in Chronicles 16:26, where it says, all the gods of the people are idols, but the real God has this power, ex nihilo creation. That sets him apart in such a fantastically unique way that like you can't touch that. There's no other God that can approximate that. Okay? Any creator other than God has to create ex materia, out of matter. There has to be pre-existing matter out of which something comes. So even all of your astrological, cosmological theories of the origins of the universe, all of them start with there was something that is arranged into the everything. There's no means in science to get to ex nihilo creation. You have to have God for that. Okay. Turn to Deuteronomy 32:17. Deuteronomy 32. They sacrificed to demons who were not God. The gods whom they have not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. Explain to me how an eternal God can be a newcomer. How can an eternal God be the new kid on the block?
New in thought, like people are thinking of it. I'm trying to think of how to word this. Not that he's new physically or in any time sense, but in the world of thought.
They're newly arriving at a knowledge of him, maybe. You could argue that, but the problem is what Moses is saying here in Deuteronomy is they were worshiping these entities as if they're gods. First of all, they're chronologically more recent than the actual God. That's a problem, right? And second of all, so just in case you weren't aware, they're not actually gods, they're demons. And that explains, there's this accounts for what we observe in the world. There is legitimate spiritual power in false religion. There is legitimate spiritual power in false religion.
Could you expand on the distinction between gods they had never known to gods that had come recently?
That's just two ways of saying the same thing. You didn't know them, they're recent to you. Deuteronomy 32:17. There is legitimate spiritual power in false religion.
This is kind of one of my favorite topics. This is why I have lips all the time.
Okay.
But isn't it like, I'm pretty sure throughout Exodus, all the plagues are essentially God dominating the
The Egyptian deities. Yes, he's targeting different Egyptian gods.
Am I mistaken in this? I believe the magicians, the Egyptian magicians had genuine miracles they performed through their.
I wouldn't call them miracles. I would call them signs or wonders. But
Not necessarily.
yeah, there's a technical distinction. I get what you're saying, but there's a technical distinction between a sign or a wonder and a miracle. Magic tricks.
Tricks and stuff.
Yeah.
And then as soon as Moses changes the river into blood, that's the sign of yep, you're
I think it was when he turned the dust into mites because he made life.
something along those lines.
Yeah, they couldn't generate life. But the whole point though that's being made here is he's acknowledging you're worshiping. There's genuinely an article of worship there, and the worship actually has some spiritual potency to it. When you get into things like witchcraft, when you get into things like Islam, there's legitimately spiritual power in that, and people can feel it, and they feel like they've got a legitimate spiritual connection because guess what? They do. The problem is that spiritual connection that is legitimate and also powerful. The one that I'm probably most exposed to in familiarity is the Japanese Buddhist and Shinto system, mostly just because I'm in Japan twice a year. Right after I leave here, I'm going home for 2 weeks, and then I'm going to Japan for 2 weeks. Literally, my wife and I are always trying to find a house in Japan. We're constantly scouring the real estate market. I want to buy a house there. But when we spend a lot of time walking through the Japanese temples and just kind of checking it out, because to me it's fascinating. I'm very intrigued by it. Not because I'm oh, well, maybe I'll convert to Buddhism. That's obviously not my motive. But the spiritual reality of what they're doing is very interesting to me. And I'm very curious in how can I bring the truth of the gospel into a place like this? And that's as Christians how we should approach these false religions. Not as if they're meaningless, not as if, well, there's no power in that. There is. There's demonic power, but there is power, and you can't deny that. Okay, because we're so belabored on this point, I have another probably 10 verses that go along with this, but does that suffice? Are we good with those two? Can we move on?
Yeah, I think we know that God is God.
Okay. But again, there are about another 10 or 12 verses that talk about kind of the same thing from different angles, that talks about God's unique deity as opposed to the false gods that other people worship.
Will you give us the verses just so that we can look them up on our own?
Deuteronomy 4:39, Numbers 23:19, Hosea 11:9. We'll leave it at that. Deuteronomy 4:39. I'm not going to turn to all of these. And these are just the ones that I've written in my margin for this passage. But if you go to the other ones, I've got they spiral out from there. Numbers 23:19, and Hosea 11:9. Okay. Just be aware, the Bible is, if you start looking for all this stuff, the Bible's got a lot to say about who God is, and it's also got a lot to say about false gods too. Verse 9, but now you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God. How is it then that you would turn your back on the weak and worthless, turn back again to the weak and worthless and elemental things to which you desire to be enslaved all over again? The connection here between false gods that are purely created physical entities, and when I say physical, I don't mean you can touch them, even the spiritual things. They're physical in the sense that they are part of the created order, not part of the uncreated order, okay? So maybe we'll say creaturely, not physical. Okay, creaturely is in created. They're intangible, spiritual, right? But still creaturely. So having come to know the real eternal non-created, metaphysically real God, how could you be lured away to creaturely created things? How could you, here's a really weird way to word it. My wife was born and raised in Juneau, Alaska. She lived her whole life there, aside from a quick stint in Russia, but she lived her life in Juneau. And when we moved to Kauai, one of my favorite fruits I love mangoes. I have a mango tree outside of my bedroom. It's the best mangoes I've ever had in my life. My wife was like, oh, I like mangoes too. And I was telling her, I was like, you've never had a real mango. She's like, yes, I have. I bought them at Fred Meyer's. I'm like, no, you've never had a real mango. And we got to Hawaii, and when we first moved there, we had rented a place before we bought our house. But when we moved into our rental, one of our neighbors, and to this day I don't even know which neighbor, but one of our neighbors left a paper bag on our doorstep as a welcoming gift with 2 mangoes in it that they had picked off of their tree. So 2 fresh picked mangoes. And my wife's like, oh, yay, mangoes. I'm like, you just wait. She cut them open, and she was just blown away. She's like, oh, my gosh, I've never had a mango. I'm like, exactly, that's what I told you. You've never had a mango. I'm telling you guys, living in Alaska, any mango that you guys get shipped here from somewhere else, not even close.
Yeah, most of our fruit, they have to cut early so they can survive the fly-in, so they're not fully developed.
So when I have mangoes at my house, I go outside at the picking pole and I pull them off the tree and then I eat them. They're like the sap is still flowing out of the like little stem when I'm cutting it open and eating it. They're that fresh. They're warm from being in the sun still. Okay, so what I'm saying though is if you know the real thing, a fresh, good mango, a mango bought at Fred Meyer is never going to compare. You're never going to be like, yeah, this is a close second. It's not even on the same par. So what Paul's saying here is, having come to know the real God, how do these false religious systems hold any appeal to you? If you understand God's grace, if you've tasted and seen that the Lord is good, how does this fake fruit taste good to you? This legalistic system of bondage and works, how does that appeal to you if you've actually seen the truth of God's gospel? Do you see the argument that Paul's making here? Having come to know God, or rather be known by him, how are you turning back to these other beggarly, worthless things? You observe days and months and seasons and years. And again, I'm not going to jump into this, but Paul unpacks this idea further in Romans 14, verse 5 and following. I'm afraid for you. Perhaps, maybe I wasted my time preaching in the first place, Paul's saying. Maybe I labored in vain. I thought I came. I thought I preached the gospel. I thought you understood it. And now look at you. I gave you the gospel of grace, and you're like, oh, cool, I'm going to eat this instead. Okay, this is a really weird analogy, but hear me out. It's not quantity that's important, it's quality. Would we all agree? If you had the ability to eat some healthy food, but not a sufficient quantity to satisfy your hunger, your appetite, is that better than being able to eat as much McDonald's as you want, as long as you want, as often as you want? What is better for the health of your body? But what is better for the health of your body? Unlimited access to food of bad quality or limited access to high quality, nutritious food? Okay, now let me give you guys a really weird comparison. Again, we're going to bring all this back to the gospel, but I want you guys to think through all of these other aspects, right? What is better for you spiritually? What has more spiritual health for you? If you were to meet somebody and get married and have a loving, monogamous relationship with one person, or to live a riotous life with multiple partners, As many as you want. What is more spiritually healthy for you? Our culture is saying that the more the merrier, right? That's like eating a McDonald's buffet. You are technically getting more food, but it's not good for you. That kind of indulgence ultimately destroys you. It doesn't help you. It doesn't nourish you. That kind of indulgence destroys you, not nourishes. And we can easily understand that in the context of food. I'd rather have a meager, healthy meal than an abundance of garbage, right? We can, once we think it through, we can kind of understand it in the relation, like in the context of relationship, right? I'd rather have a limited, healthy relationship than a plethora of unhealthy, broken relationships, right? The same thing is true spiritually. Is it more important that you are heavily invested in participating in a religious system that ultimately leads to your own death and destruction? Or would it be better to just be at least tangentially associated with a religious system that actually feeds you, cares for you, and saves you? Now, some people argue, oh, but you have to be all in for Jesus, and I agree. But if you're just barely saved by the skin of your teeth, that's an awful lot better than being heavily invested in legalistic garbage, right? A meager Christian life that's truly rooted in the gospel of grace is better than any other religious expression that is rooted in legalism, carnality, and self-effort. And it doesn't matter how good you are at that. It's not the same. Okay? I'm afraid maybe I wasted my time preaching. I beg of you, brethren, become as I am, for I have also become as you are. You have done me no wrong, but you know that it was because of a bodily illness that I preached the gospel for you the first time. Okay. We don't know what Paul's bodily infirmity was. Some scholars think that he had malaria, and so to help his physical condition, he traveled to Galatia because the climate there would have helped. There's no record of that anywhere in the Bible, so that's all speculation. The closest speculation that does seem to have some kind of biblical mandate or support is the idea that Paul had been dealing with some kind of eye trouble, because he, in some places, talks about his hideous physical appearance. Maybe his eyes are all like, bleh. Maybe his eyes are just all like cooked. He says in Galatians 6:11, look at what large letters I write to you. And so I can picture Paul with his bad eyesight, like doing this, writing. Well, he did write a lot, but he dictated a lot of it. And it was his habit to sign off personally at the end. So it's generally the greetings at the end that Paul wrote with his own hand, but the rest of it was dictated through a secretary. So Paul didn't do the majority of the actual writing. It came from him. He dictated, and they just wrote down what he said. But then when you get to look at Galatians 6:11, see with what large letters I am now writing to you with my own hand. So the whole letter was written by somebody else, and then Galatians 6:11, Paul takes over and starts writing. I'm writing the final greeting. He's signing off. And then also here in this same passage, Paul says, verse 15, when then is that sense of blessing you had? For I bear you witness that if possible, you have plucked your own eyes out and given them to me. Like, what a weird thing to say, right? You would have given me your own eyes if you could, which seems to imply that Paul did have some kind of eye trouble that he was dealing with, because he's saying, when I was there, you guys were so sympathetic to my condition. You would have given me your own eyes if you could. So again, we don't know what physical malady caused Paul to come and visit the Galatian church. Verse 14, and that which was a trial to you in my bodily condition, you did not despise or loathe, but you received me as if I were an angel of God, as if I were Jesus Christ himself, which is fascinating that Paul's almost circling back to his opening remarks in chapter 1, right? Even if we or an angel from heaven should come and preach to you a different gospel, he's saying, you received me as if I were an angel, But again, the point isn't that they received him like an angel or that he came as if he were Jesus himself. The point is that the content of the gospel that he preached was scripturally accurate and biblically true. And that's the thing that matters, right? We looked at verse 15. Verse 16. Do you guys know who G. Campbell Morgan is? Or sorry, not G. Campbell Morgan. J. Vernon McGee. Sorry, I'm thinking of a different guy. J. Vernon McGee. You guys have his set of sermons right there, second shelf, far left. J. Vernon McGee was a Southern man, so if you listen to his sermons, he's got that really refreshing Southern drawl. I used to wake up at 5:30 in the morning just to listen to J. Vernon McGee's sermons when I was in high school. I'd set my alarm clock to go off, and it would be J. Vernon McGee because that's when he came on, and then I'd go back to sleep. He was a pastor in Compton. I don't know if you guys know anything about Compton. Does anybody know where Compton is? Has anyone ever been to Compton? It's in California, and it is one of the most gang-riddled, violent neighborhoods. It is a straight ghetto, in the most ghetto sense of the term ghetto. And it's been that way for decades. When J. Vernon McGee was there, it was a ghetto. But on the front of his pulpit at his church in Compton, J. Vernon McGee had Galatians 4:16 on the front of his pulpit. So have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? That's kind of a tough verse to have on your pulpit, what, are you going to be mad at me? I'm telling you the truth. This is a wild one. Does anybody know a guy named Jesse Stringer from Juneau? Jesse Stringer? You know the church at by Twin Lakes?
I know Twin Lakes. I don't.
Okay, so right at the end of Twin Lakes when you're going towards Breeze Inn, there's a church right there, right by the old folks home. You live in Juneau, right? Okay.
Did Jesse potentially end up doing ministry in Mongolia long term?
Probably.
Yeah, I might know him.
Okay.
Because I know a Jesse that I think is from Juneau. He also could be from Anchorage. Him and his wife have been working towards doing ministry long term in Mongolia. They have one daughter.
It's been years since I've talked to Jesse. But the whole point I'm bringing up Jesse Stringer, because he's from Juneau, right when my first son was born, who's now 19, Jesse came over to my house hey, you had a baby, let me see your baby. People do that thing where they come and see people's kids. And I don't remember why we got on this topic, but we were having a conversation about something, and he made this comment, and it just stuck with me. And it was a throwaway comment for him. He probably doesn't remember saying it. But he said, if somebody tells you something you don't like, you still have to deal with it. And you may not like that they said it, but if it's true, you still have to square with what they said. You can be mad at them, but it's still true. You can be upset that that was so rude, but it's still true. And it doesn't matter how you received it or what it felt like to receive it. If it's true, you still have to address the fact that it's true. And that's a really hard pill for most people to swallow, right? Because nobody likes being said something unkind or untoward about you. But hey, you know what? Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? Now, this isn't advocating a kind of Christianity that is aggressive or that is unsavory or unkind. But there is a reality where, as a Christian, sometimes we are obligated to say things that are going to be offensive to other people, such as, it's time for your break. So, half hour, ready to go. Okay, so, maybe before we get started, two things really quick. Luke had mentioned to me at one point that possibly you guys wanted to do a Q&A with me, and if you guys want to do that, I'm okay. Just tell me when.
Right now.
Are you coming to the banquet on Friday night?
You should. Starting now.
Sure.
Yeah.
You should come to banquet Friday night. You have to dress up as the Lord of the Rings character.
Right, so
That's necessary.
I don't know that I can dress up as a Lord of the Rings character just because of the...
Just roll like your pant leg. Is
we'll see. I'm an incredibly introverted person. Being denied entrance would not be problematic to me. The second piece too that I was willing to throw out there is, I like training martial arts. If anyone wants to do jujitsu, I'm down. I don't know if we have like mats or something. Yeah.
We have crash pads with pads.
Bouldering pads will totally work. So if you guys want to do that, just tell me when is a good time in your schedule.
Right now, right here.
Look, what a great question. I leave on Saturday
We should do it on Friday.
during the banquet. I'm just kidding. Okay. Look, I'm down. I'm going to be totally honest because I have not trained jujitsu in like 3 weeks just because work and life and teaching.
I did it one time, like 5 years ago. What are we doing?
I'm just throwing out there if anyone wants to train jujitsu, I'd be down to fight you guys.
They did a wrestling thing like 2 weeks ago.
We're what? What does that mean? Okay. Look, after I teach classes, I just sit in my room and read. So it's not like I'm incredibly busy. That's like my preferred activity. I have a separate office that I built, like detached from my house, and it has almost all of my books. But I built into it a lofted bed. So I often sleep in my office. Because I'll wake up in the middle of the night because I can't sleep, and I'll go down to my office and read, and then I'll fall asleep and sleep in my office. Okay, so if you guys want to do like some kind of a Q&A, I'm open. Just let me know when. What the technical term for that is a quadlibital discussion. Quadlibital.
Okay, we need to remember this to ask the next instructor. Can we have a little discussion?
I want to be able to spell it.
Bonus class where you just tell us stuff that you are excited about. That doesn't have to do with Galatians specifically, but just like biblical things that you're excited about right now.
Quadlib. I don't know if I'm spelling this right, because again, spelling is like my weakest subject. But a quadlibital discussion, it's a Latin scholastic term that just means a conversation about any topic that you want to talk about. So it's usually done in a academic setting where a student will have an opportunity to ask any questions regardless of whether or not it's on or off topic according to the class. But so that would be the term of like an open-ended Q&A would be a quadlibital discussion. So if you guys would like to do a quadlibital discussion, I'm open to it. Not opposed. And again, if you guys are upset with my teaching and want to fight me, I'm open to that too.
Every challenge has like a jujitsu match.
Look, I've been doing martial arts since I was 6. I like to fight. That's like, for me, that's like a sport. It's fun. Like some people like to play chess. I like to fight. It's fun. Okay. So, are you guys ready to jump back into Galatians chapter 4? Have I become your enemy by telling you the truth? They eagerly seek you, not commendably, but they wish to shut you out so that you will seek them. Now, again, this balance between the legalistic sect that's troubling the Galatians and the true gospel, there's definitely a strong conflict, right? And Paul's saying that these legalists, they're out to get you, but not like in a good way. They're not trying to acquire you into the kingdom. They're trying to put you in a place where you need their legalistic guidance to function. They're trying to make you dependent upon them and their rules. Anytime in your Christianity somebody is trying to subjugate you underneath their system, that's a pretty big red flag that it's not authentic or biblical Christianity.
What would be an example of some of these systems?
Mormonism, the Catholic Church, heavily legalistic churches that like have dress codes. There's a lot of examples out there. It'd be hard to list all of them, but you know it when you're in it. Does that help? You can feel that, like, man, this just feels really oppressive. And when you contrast that with what Jesus said, Jesus didn't say, take my yoke upon you because, boy, do I have a lot of chores for you. He said, take my yoke upon you, it's light. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. So if Christianity feels overwhelming, you're doing it wrong. If the burden of the gospel feels oppressive, that isn't the gospel. The gospel should feel like liberation, not bondage. Okay? Sorry, hold on, I gotta answer this guy. My crew is getting started on another job, and like in real time they're 2 hours behind, and so there's like they're at the job site asking questions about like, well, how do you want us to do this flashing? So sorry, I have to answer these. I can't just like, yeah, you'll figure it out. They're gonna sit around on the job site for 3 hours going, dude, I asked you this. What are we supposed to do? Okay, so again, so legalism always feels like bondage, and the gospel always feels like freedom. And that's a really important, like if you feel like the gospel, if you feel like Christianity is oppressive, if you feel like it's just too much, like I just can't do this, well, that's kind of the point. You're not supposed, like you can't do this. But the reality is the gospel should feel freeing because I can't do this and I don't need to. Jesus in and through me by the Spirit of God, by humble dependence upon the grace of God, God will do this through me. I don't do it volitionally through my best efforts in my flesh. Okay, so there's a real big gap there. And hopefully I'm helping you understand the gospel in hopefully you already know this and you're like, yeah, we know. But if it's not something that you've experienced in Christianity, hopefully I'm helping you see, like, guys, this is the gospel. This is what Christianity really is at its core. It is good always to be eagerly sought in a commendable manner, and not only when I'm present with you. And then Paul says this is a really interesting thing. He says, my children, with whom I am again in labor until Christ is formed in you, but I could wish to be present with you now and change my tone because I am perplexed about you. When he talks about Christ being formed in you, Christ being formed in you or being saved, those are kind of like synonymous terms. He's like, I just want you to be born again into the kingdom of heaven, have Christ formed in you. And the catch there is a legal, performative, works-based gospel negates genuine salvation. Those two things are not, they're not compatible. You can't be genuinely saved and also performatively working on being a Christian based on your own best efforts and your own performance. Does that make sense? If you're being performative and if you're trying to fulfill these requirements and these rules, that's not real Christianity. If you're really a Christian, then you won't be doing that. Those two things are mutually exclusive. You can't have both and, okay? I do want to make a quick note. I'm not saying that if you slip into legalism, therefore you're now not saved. You're just struggling with legalism. But if you're trying to work to be saved, you blew it already. You're already out the door. Tell me, you who want to be under the law, have you actually read it? Is Paul's point. Do you even know what you're actually looking into? Do you understand what the requirement of the law is? Now, this is where it gets really wild because Paul says, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? And then the thing that he jumps immediately to is something that is so almost like, wait, that's your example, Paul? That's where you're going? Because you would expect him to start quoting something from Leviticus, right? Or Deuteronomy. you'd expect Paul to start referring to the sacrificial system or to start talking about something about circumcision. That's where you would kind of anticipate that Paul would go in that direction, but he doesn't. He goes to this really weird side place. And the way he introduces it is fascinating because he says in verse 22, "For it is written." That formula right there, "for it is written," usually introduces a quotation of Scripture. For it is written, and then you quote Psalm 2 or Leviticus 9, or I don't know. You say, "For it is written," and then it gives a quotation of Scripture, but Paul doesn't do that. He says, "For it is written," and then he gives a summary of like this entire theme in Scripture, which is a really unusual thing for Paul to do. But when you look at what he's doing and why, you're like, oh, shoot, that makes a lot of sense. That was a genius move by Paul. "For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons." Now, technically, Abraham had more than 2 sons. But for the sake of this analogy, for the sake of this metaphor, we're focusing in on 2 specific sons. So the Bible doesn't say he only had 2 sons. He's referring to 2 specific sons of Abraham. Because some people say, oh, there's a contradiction in the Bible. It says he had 2 sons. Yeah. If you have 12 sons, you also definitely at least have 2? Yes. Okay. So it's not a contradiction. It's just an incomplete statement. Does that make sense? He had more than 2 sons, but he definitely had a minimum of 2. So for Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman, the other one by a freedwoman. Now, this is also very fascinating because the status of the child is not determined by the father, it's determined by the mother. Okay, now keep that in your mind for a second. The status of the child is not determined by the father, it's determined by the mother. Okay, he had one by the bondwoman and one by the freedwoman. So you've got Sarah and Hagar. The son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the freedwoman was born by the promise. So think back to Genesis when Abraham was given the promise by God, through your seed, all the nations shall be blessed, right? We saw that same promise in Galatians, right? Paul already talked about it in chapter 3. Think back to that. What happened there? Was the promise being fulfilled as quickly as Abraham had anticipated? Was it coming about and Abraham was like, okay, things are right on track? Or is Abraham kind of starting to doubt God and his faith was wavering? Right? And so what did Abraham do? He decided to, by his own efforts, well, I can help God. I'll just go ahead and do this. And then what happened? The whole Hagar-Ishmael thing, right? Did that actually make things better or worse? That was a catastrophic failure. For historical context, the Ishmaelites, the line of Ishmael, those are the Arabs and the Islamic people. The Islamic religions are the descendants of Ishmael. So we're still dealing with the ramifications of Abraham's carnal decision. God had told him, we're going to do this and we're going to do it my way. And Abraham said, I'm totally on board. Let me help you. And God was like, oh, wait, no, dummy. Do not do that thing. We do the exact same thing. God will say, hey, I've got a plan for your life. I've got an outcome that I'm working towards in you. And we go, all right, Lord, I'm on board. How can I help? Don't. Yeah, but I want to be involved. Let me do something. In your flesh, please don't. And then we try hard. And it never goes well. It always ruins things. We ruin things. Because what does the flesh bring into every situation? Death. It never brings life. It always brings death. So there was 2 sons, one by the bondwoman, one by the free woman. And then Paul goes on to say, look, I'm speaking allegorically here. Now, that's just a quick hermeneutical note, like when you're interpreting scripture, the Bible is to be interpreted literally unless there are clear clues or clear reason to understand it in a different allegorical way. And so Paul is saying, time out, this is an allegory. Oh, okay. Which actually lends credence to, bless you, the reality that the story of Abraham is fundamentally true and Paul's applying it in allegory. Okay? But anyway, this is an allegory. For these two women are, allegorically speaking, representative of two covenants. One proceeding from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are slaves, that's Hagar. Now, Mount Sinai, what is that talking about? What came from Mount Sinai? The law of Moses, right? But again, let's go back to the Hebrews thing we looked at the other day, right? Hebrews chapter 11. All these people pleased God according to faith until Mount Sinai, right? All these people pleased God according to faith until Mount Sinai when the law was introduced. And then when you got to this performative-based system, the next person that pleased God, Rahab the harlot, not a Jew, not under the covenantal system of the law, exempt from all of that because she's outside of the commonwealth of Israel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So when you have this, there's like this split, right? So you've got Hagar and Sarah. And this is law, works. This is grace or faith. And there's a divide here. These two things, they don't mingle, right? This is allegorically speaking, right? These two women represent two covenants, one proceeding from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are slaves, Hagar. This system right here, this is slavery or bondage. And this is freedom. Like the contrast couldn't be greater between these two diametrically opposed systems. Now, this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and it corresponds to the present Jerusalem because she is in slavery with her children. He's basically saying the Jews, the modern day Jews in Paul's time that are living according to this legal works-based system, they are slaves to the system of performative religion that they're bound up in. And they're trying to infect you with this doctrine of circumcision, which is a performative act, as if you could earn your salvation by doing something. But the Jerusalem above is free, for she is our mother. Now, this is a really weird concept, the Jerusalem above. But if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, comes down from quote unquote heaven, whatever that means. It's a gigantic floating cube with different, like 12 layers. I don't even know how to begin to understand this. Yeah. It's like all the other gigantic floating cubes that we have in the sky orbiting Earth. Okay, wait, so here's the thing. The whole thing, like the gold being transparent like glass, I totally have a really fun theory about that. Your body is clear with X-ray light. X-rays are a wavelength of light, and with X-ray light, your body is clear. That's how we take X-rays. We can see right through you with X-ray radiation. When you get to heaven, it says there's no more sun, there's no more moon, there's no more lamp, for the Lamb of God is its light. The light in heaven is God himself. So with a different kind of light, things like gold are going to behave differently. Because when you apply different kinds of light to this world that we live in now, your body is clear. So if you have the glory of God as the light that illuminates the world that you live in, things like gold might be clear. It's totally rational. Now, because everyone's like, oh, pure gold, the more you purify, maybe it's so pure that it becomes clear. No matter how pure you get gold, it doesn't actually ever become transparent inherently. So I don't think it's so pure that it's clear. I'm sure it's pure, but I think that the difference isn't in the gold. I think the difference is in the kind of light that's applied to it. Because again, has anyone ever had an X-ray? You can definitely see directly through your body with x-rays, right? You can see what's inside of you with x-rays. Your body is transparent to x-ray. It's not transparent to normal spectrum of light, but to the x-ray spectrum of light, your body is clear. To the spectrum of light that emanates from God's being, gold is transparent. I don't know what that means or why, but I know that there's an analogy in x-rays makes things clear. So it makes sense, right? I just think that's what's going on there. I think it's the light of God. But anyway, the Jerusalem above is free, okay? Verse 27, for it is written, and here he quotes Isaiah 54, I think verse 1. Rejoice, barren woman who does not bear, break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more numerous are the children of the desolate than the one who has a husband. There are no grandchildren in the family of God. Okay, you guys are all familiar with David and Goliath, right? David goes out to fight Goliath, and let's kind of think through that story. How does that story go? The Goliath is taunting the armies of Israel. David shows up to bring his brothers. If you watch VeggieTales, you know that he brought him cheese pizzas. What does Saul offer David in his fight against Goliath? His armor. Saul says, here, wear my armor. And why does David reject Saul's armor? He's not used to it. It doesn't fit him. It's not his armor. So what does David go out into the battle with? His staff and his pouch and his slingshot, the things that he's been using his whole life. And here's the other fun side fact. How many stones does he grab?
5.
Why?
Because Goliath had sons.
Goliath had 4 brothers.
Oh.
It was 4 brothers.
Okay. I thought it was sons.
He had 4 brothers, and David was like, he didn't grab 5 because he thought he was going to miss. If you read through the rest of Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, either David or his mighty men commissioned by him, they kill all of David's brothers. David is like, I'm coming for you and all your brothers, and I don't miss. So he grabbed 5 stones, and again, it's important to know that he didn't grab 5 stones thinking, what if? He was like, headshots for everybody. 1 shot kills, you're all going down. I'm coming for you, all of you, not just you and your brothers. You're done. All of your whole line, I'm wiping you out. But David wouldn't go out to battle in Saul's armor. He had to go to battle in his armor. There is a really, really interesting parallel or application for us. You may have a youth pastor that you look up to, or maybe your mom or your dad has an amazing faith, but you can't go out into the Christian life wearing their armor. It doesn't fit you. You can wear your armor plus nothing else. Their armor will not work for you. There is no generational salvation. Your mom, your dad, your pastor, your youth pastor, your mentor, whatever, they may be a wonderful man or woman of God. They might have an excellent faith. They might be such a good example, but their faith doesn't help you. You have to be individually saved on your own, by yourself, before God, not because your mom is, not because your dad is, and not because your pastor is. And David's armor that he went out to the battle with was like meager. It was a staff, a sling, and a pouch. That was his weapons. That was his whole getup, right? He didn't have chainmail. He didn't have a helmet. He didn't have a shield. But his whole thing was, I've never used those before, and I've never needed them. I don't need them now. And if you're going out into your Christian life relying on what God has needed to supply to somebody else and expecting that to work for you, but you've never tested it or tried it on your own, it's not going to work. Not only will it not help you, it's likely to fit so poorly that it'll trip you up. And here's maybe kind of a weird example, but I'm really into theistic metaphysics and Christian philosophy, right? If you try to take some of the little bits and pieces that I've taught you and then just assume that you understand the whole field, and then you went to debate a Christian philosopher or an atheistic philosopher, would that armor work for you? Not only would it not work, it would actually probably end very disastrously. It would work against you, right? But here's the catch. You have individual experience. You have very specific experience with God that I don't have. And so you're actually more equipped to handle things that I could never address. And I'm equipped to handle things that you could never address. Just like David could fight Goliath and Saul couldn't. Saul had his armor and it worked great for Saul, but not here. And David couldn't take Saul's armor and win the same battle. It wouldn't work. Okay? So when it's saying the Jerusalem above, even though she doesn't have children, she's desolate, she has more kids in that sense. It's not that there's like lineage of Christian faith. Every generation is the first and last generation of Christians. Every single generation of Christians is simultaneously the first generation and the last generation of that line. Because God doesn't have grandkids or great-grandkids, he just has children. So you are a child of God, you are not a grandchild of God. Maybe your parents are saved, I love that for you, fantastic. Their salvation doesn't help you. Maybe your parents aren't saved. Okay, but that also doesn't hurt you. You are saved on your own before God. Okay, there is no generational Christianity. You cannot go out in somebody else's faith and expect that to help you personally. It won't. You have to have your own relationship with God. Not mine, not your mom's, not your dad's, not your youth pastors, not your older brother or sisters. Maybe they've got a great faith and they can encourage you, but they can't help you. You're saved on your own. You, brethren, like Isaac, are the children of promise, not the children of striving and effort, not the children of carnal production. You're the children of promise, just like Isaac. Now, again, to go back to the whole Sarah and Abraham thing, the really wild thing about that is God was doing something very specific. And I mean, Paul draws it out here. Part of what was so important about Abraham and Sarah, it's not just that God promised a child, so the child was of promise and not of Abraham and Sarah. God actually waited to fulfill his promise till after Sarah was past childbearing age. Her body, in the sense of childbearing, had already, in that sense, died. Okay? She was no longer childbearing age. And that's when God introduced Isaac. God made absolutely certain that it wasn't just that it wasn't an act of the flesh. He made absolutely certain that it couldn't even possibly have been an act of carnality or of the flesh. It was by God's intervention alone that this thing happened. So too with your salvation. It cannot be an act of carnality or of the flesh that brings you into the child or the family of God as a child of God. It is by God's miraculous intervention. God breaks through into your life. You are dead in your trespasses and sins, just like Sarah was dead in her womb. There's no life there that can produce anything of value or merit on its own, just like you have no ability to please God in your flesh. But when God, who is rich in mercy and love, decides to shine the light of the gospel upon you and you either receive or reject it, it is by the working of God, not by the machinations of man, that you are born again. And again, you're not born again because your parents are so godly. You're born again because you receive the gospel plus nothing else. Does that make sense? Okay. But at that time, he was born according to the flesh, persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit. So it is now. Just like Ishmael bullied Isaac, legalists bully Christians. It happened then, it happens now, and it's not going to stop. There is nothing that legalism hates more than liberty. And if you have legitimate liberty in the gospel, you have freedom. Legalism, slavery, hates that. We're going to get into slavery here in a second, okay? But what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. He's quoting Genesis 21, verse 10. But this verse right here, okay, so within the boundaries of Paul's argument that he's making, he is saying that the bondwoman, or Hagar, what does Hagar represent in this allegory? The law, works, slavery, bondage. Paul is saying that this entire system and anything that it produces has no place in the life of a Christian. There is no room whatsoever for legalism, for works-based performance, for bondage, for oppression. There is no place for that. That is to be cast out. That is to be rejected and removed from your midst. It is not welcome. It is not to be named among you. So cast these things out. But on the other side, what is supposed to remain? The child of promise, right? Which would be Sarah, or grace, faith, true, legitimate freedom in Christ. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free woman. And now we're going to get into chapter 5. Can I erase all of this? Yes? Okay, I'm going to do it. Okay, we're going to talk about freedom for a second, because this is the whole thrust of Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. It was for freedom that Christ has set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. This hopefully is not too new of a concept for you, but if it is, buckle up, okay? Freedom, most people think that freedom is the ability to do whatever you want. Okay, most people think freedom is, I have freedom, so therefore I can do whatever I want. I'm telling you here that that is not the biblical or the Christian view of freedom. That is not what freedom is according to the Bible. And here's how Paul is kind of bringing this out. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Therefore, make sure that you continue in freedom and do not get sucked back into a yoke of slavery. If you always do whatever you want, you are a slave to your own desire, and you cannot tell yourself no. If for you freedom is I can do whatever I want, if you always say yes to what you want, you're a slave. Freedom, in the biblical sense, is being able to do what you ought to do. You are free to do what you should do, not what you want to do. So freedom, genuinely speaking, is doing what you ought to do, but slavery, biblically speaking, is doing whatever you want. Now here's the catch. Doing whatever you want, the term for that is hedonism. You guys familiar with that term? If you are hedonistic and you always do whatever you want, you are a slave to your own desires, and the catch is that slavery feels so liberating that we don't realize that we're in bondage. Because the thing that you're in bondage to is your desires, and you actually desire your own enslavement. Turn to John chapter 3. We looked at that verse the other day, right? In John 3:16, everyone knows John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, etc., etc. You skip down a couple of verses to John 3:19. This is the judgment that light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than the light because their deeds were evil. They loved the darkness, and they aggressively pursued it, and they felt like they were free, but they were slaves to their own desire. Their own desire bound them in the pursuit of that which destroyed them. You guys following all of this so far? There's a line in a song by a band called Waterdeep, and the guy singing says, the prison bars don't have to be too strong, It's how many of them are stacked side by side that keep you in the cell. They don't have to be strong prison bars. There just has to be enough of them to keep you there. And the problem with the prison of self-desire, it doesn't feel like prison because you want to be there. What's the difference between a fortress and a prison? The difference is your own personal preference. Prison is a fortress to those who want to be there, and a fortress is a prison to those who don't want to be there. So Christianity, the law or the rules of God, if you are inclined to want to serve God, the name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and they are safe. But if you are rebellious, God feels so oppressive. And it feels so like, oh man, it's so hard. God, like all these rules. So we're going to start dealing with this almost like weird contradiction here, okay? True freedom in Christ. Now, the outcome looks the same. If you are free in Christ, you actually end up behaving the way a legalist would behave. Somebody who is incredibly legalistic and morally driven and they're trying to earn their own salvation, they look like, well, they actually look like Mormons, right? Because that's what Mormons are doing. They are the kindest, most gentle, polite, congenial people. Mormons are great to be around. They're fantastic neighbors. They're doing all the right things, but they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. They're not free, they're in bondage. A person who is genuinely filled by the Spirit of God, they're going to act the same way. That's what's so confusing. They're going to act the same way. The difference is the Mormon has to and the Christian wants to. The Mormon is in bondage, therefore he behaves. The Christian is so incredibly free that he's able to behave. This is a really weird question. When's the last time you guys had to go to Philemon for anything? Turn to Philemon, verse 14. Philemon is probably one of my more favorite epistles just because it's hilarious. It is easily the most sarcastic thing that Paul ever wrote. If you read through Philemon, like Paul, dude, that guy just like let him have it. Can I give you some examples because it's so fun to me? So the whole context of Philemon is Paul is writing to Philemon about this guy named Onesimus. Onesimus had been a slave that Philemon owned, and Onesimus escaped from Philemon. And then Onesimus got saved through Paul's ministry. And then Philemon got saved through Paul's ministry. And Paul happened to know that, wait a second, Philemon, you're a Christian, and Onesimus, you're a Christian. Well, you guys should get back together again. And Onesimus is like, don't send me back there. The guy's going to beat me. Paul's like, no, it's cool. I'll write you a letter. And this is the letter that Paul sends with Onesimus back to Philemon, the escaped slave being sent back to his master. Okay? Let me find some specific verses, right? Look at verses 8 and 9. Therefore, though I have enough confidence in Christ to order you to do what is proper, yet for love's sake, rather, I appeal to you, since I am such a person as Paul. I'm so old. Poor, pale, frail Paul, the prisoner of Christ. Look at what Paul's saying. Look, buddy, I'm Paul, the apostle. I could straight tell you what to do, and you'd have to shut up and do it because I'm the apostle Paul. But I'm just frail old Paul, just prisoner Paul. So I'll ask you kindly. You'd better do it, though. I appeal to you for my child Onesimus, who I've begotten in my imprisonment. He was formerly useless to you, but I'm telling you, the guy's pretty cool, actually. I mean, you didn't like him, but I like him, so what does that say about you, Philemon? Do a little introspection here, buddy. I'm sending him back to you in person as if I were sending you my own heart. You gonna be mean to him? Really? You're going to be like, because this guy, like, I'm sending you my own heart. I love this guy. So if you are mean to him, then you hate me. So don't screw this up, Philemon. I wished I could keep him with me. I like the guy. But on your behalf, that he might minister to me some imprisonment, in my imprisonment in the gospel. Like if I kept him, that'd be you doing me a favor. But I get that he's your slave. So I'm just considering this a personal favor from you, that he's even with me in the first place. But look at verse 14. Without your consent, I did not want to do anything, so that your goodwill would not be in effect by compulsion, but rather voluntary. That right there is the core of the gospel. That your goodwill would not be compulsory, but voluntary. The manner in which you serve God is not by some kind of compulsion, but because you've just chosen to do it. It's for freedom that you've been set free. You have the freedom to choose that, you know what, I am going to serve God. I'm not going to fulfill the desires of my flesh. But then let's keep going in Philemon just because it's fun. Maybe this is the reason that you guys are separated, so that you would win him back forever. Your slave would be your best friend, Philemon. Don't screw this up. No longer as a slave, but more than a slave. He could be your brother, your buddy, your best friend. Stop treating him like a slave, dummy. Treat him like a brother in Christ. Especially to me, how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord. Like I like the guy, you'd better like him. If then you regard me as any kind of a partner, and again, you have to understand this is Paul the Apostle with all of the clout and the authority that Paul has, writing to Philemon. If you regard me as like, if we're buddies, like, hey, and I'm saying, hey, we're cool, right? You and me, we're good? If you regard me as a partner, then you will accept him as if you were accepting me. No pressure, but do it. Look at 18. If Onesimus has wronged you in any way, or if he owes you anything, just put that on my tab. Charge that to my account. Now again, Onesimus was a slave that had run away. He was considered property, and that would have been a massive financial blow to Philemon to lose the production of a slave. So if the guy owes you anything, like if he messed you up, like if he cost you anything, it's cool. Put that on my tab. I'll pay for him. I'm good for it. Oh, also, by the way, since we're on that, I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will repay every penny. But not to mention, have we covered the balance that you owe me your soul? So if we're going to settle accounts, we can do that. And I'll pay for Onesimus, but you owe me your soul, dude. You want to settle? Let's do it. Let's settle. We can do it. Or are you good? You're good? Oh, so we're just going to forget the debts. Okay, cool, because that's what I thought. I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand, not to mention that you owe me even your own soul as well. Yes, my brother, let me benefit from you in the Lord. Refresh my heart in Christ. I have confidence in your obedience. I am absolutely certain that you're going to do exactly what I'm telling you to do. Not because I'm forcing you, but because you're not stupid and you're going to make the right choice, right? I'm not making you do it, but you're not that stupid to say no, are you? Like, you're not that stupid? Because I feel like you're not that stupid. I have confidence in your obedience. I write to you since I know that not only are you going to do everything I've said, you're going to read between the lines and you're going to go above and beyond even what I've already asked, right? You're going to do that, right, Philemon? Right, Philemon? I think this is fantastic. At the same time, why don't you get my bed ready? Because I am assuming that you're praying that I can come and visit you. Just go ahead and get my guest room prepared. Just turn down the sheets for me, buddy. I'll be there in a month. Anyway, my buddy say hi too, so the grace of the Lord Jesus be with you. Goodbye. Like, the heck, man? Like, what kind of this is such an unhinged letter. I highly encourage you to go back and read Philemon in context and see like the whole flow of what Paul's saying. It is wild. It is wild. It's such a wild ride. It is Paul basically like, it is totally like a gun to your head kind of you're going to do it, right? I mean, it's your own free will. You can choose. Do not screw this up. I am not forcing you, but I am Paul the Apostle. Just saying. Yeah, and if he owes you anything, that's fine. I'll cover it. You owe me your soul, though. So do you want to go there? Probably no, but if you do, that's fine. We can settle accounts. But again, going back to Galatians chapter 5, we are set free for freedom, not for bondage. Now, there's some irony in what Paul's saying, but there's a lot of truth there too. We have the liberty to choose to serve God or not. But even that liberty, even though it's not by compulsion, right? We're not compelled to. But if you're thinking about it from a holistic perspective, do you not owe God your very soul? What would you withhold from him? That your good deed would not be by compulsion, as it were, but voluntary. But if we're going to settle accounts, do you not, like Philemon owes Paul his soul, do you not owe God your soul? What part of you would you say, God, you have no rights to that. I'm going to go ahead and keep that. By rights, could you say, no, this is mine, God, hands off? You have free will. You could do that. Does that make sense in the grander scheme, in the calculus of salvation? Do you have the right to say, God, all of my life is yours except for this? Do you see how, like, when you start putting it in context, that sounds really stupid? Do you see how, like, now put yourself in Onesimus's position. Onesimus could never work his way back into Philemon's good graces. He blew it too hard. There's nothing, if Onesimus went back on his own merits, Philemon would have every right to just beat him and or kill him. Onesimus couldn't work his way back into Philemon's good graces. But because of the merit of another, Onesimus goes back to Philemon and is received. Now, in that context, would it make sense for Onesimus to just bank heavily on what Paul wrote and be like, you can't touch me. I'll do whatever I want? Or would it make more sense for Onesimus to be genuinely humble and repentant and to serve graciously in the house in which he now lives? What makes more sense? As Christians, by the blood of Jesus, we are redeemed. We're bought back. We're like slaves that have come back home, and we deserve wrath. We deserve judgment. We deserve to be beaten, right? We deserve all of that. But by the merit of another, by the blood of Jesus, we are now coming back into the family of God, not as a slave, but as a brother, as a child, as a son or a daughter, right? Do you see the analogy of the whole book of Philemon? Do you not see like what picture is being painted for us even in that interaction? We're coming back into the family, and on the merits of another, could we, by the blood of Christ, say, I don't need to do anything. Jesus has done it all. And then just sit back and do nothing? You could, but wouldn't that be kind of a scummy thing to do? Doesn't it make more sense to come back into the house and in humble obedience desire to serve? Are we serving so that we will be accepted, or are we already accepted because what Jesus has done? We are already accepted because of the completed work of Christ on the cross. And when we come back into the family, we ought to come back in knowing full well why we were gone and what we've done. That we deserve wrath. We deserve judgment. We deserve all of that as justice. That is rightfully what we deserve. But it is by God's grace and God's mercy that we don't get it. And so in humble reverence, we should come into the family of God and submit to him and serve him. It is for freedom that you have been set free. Don't be an idiot. Like, do you guys see the whole picture there? Do you see why I brought in Philemon and why that book like really helps illustrate this point? Okay. Behold, I, Paul, verse 2 of Galatians 5, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, then Christ is of no benefit to you. I testify, every man who receives circumcision, he is under obligation to keep the whole law. If you're going to try and earn your salvation by any of the law, then you're now obligated to all of the law. And if you're obligated to all of the law and you keep like 48% of it, is that enough? If you're obligated to all of the law and you keep 99% of it, Is that enough? How many links in the chain need to break before the chain is broken? My 17-year-old son blew his head gasket because he's dumb and didn't keep fluid in his radiator. And he knew that his radiator had a leak and he knew to put fluid in it, but he didn't because he's stupid. And he blew his head gasket, and I had to go tow him from where he blew his head gasket back to our house. And because I'm smart and not stupid, I keep a tow rope in my truck. Keep a lot of stuff in my truck. Keep a flat fix kit. I keep a battery jumper. I keep jumper cables. I keep a tow rope. I keep a lot of stuff in my truck because I'm like a prepared kind of a person, right? But I get to my son's car, and it's like, God, it was like 9:04 at night, and that's important. I get to my son's car, and I go to tow him, and he was right outside of an auto parts store when he broke when his car broke down, which was fortuitous. But the store closes at 9, and it was 9:04. So you can see the guys in there shutting down, but they're closed, so it doesn't matter that they're there. Nothing's coming out of that store for us. I'm like, well, okay, whatever. I'll just tow the car home. We'll take care of this. You know, my older son's very mechanical. I'm sure he can fix this. He did. But I go to tow my son's car, and I hook up the tow rope, and we get maybe like 3 or 4 minutes down the road, and my son calls me, and he's like, hey, the tow rope broke. I'm still driving. It had like just recently broke, so I look in the rearview mirror, and he's like slowly pulling off to the curb, because I didn't even realize the tow rope snapped, because my truck is strong enough that I just didn't even feel it. How much of that tow cable needs to break for my son to not be towed anymore? Does the whole thing, does it need to break in like 8 different places? All you need to do is break one, and I am no longer towing the guy, right? How much of the law of God do you need to break before you are guilty of breaking the law? Any piece. Even if it's, but I just had a snack, God. Sorry, you broke the law. Any portion of it broken breaks all of it. But likewise, if you believe that your meritorious keeping of the law does anything, then you are now like, okay, fine, you want the law? You have to do all of it. Just like breaking any of it breaks all of it, keeping any of it for meritorious effect obligates you to all of it. Do you see the dichotomy there, how that breaks down? If you think that keeping any of it is meritorious, you are now obligated to keep all of it, but you know you can't. So why would you try? If knowing that keeping any obligates you to all and breaking any breaks all, why would you opt in? Knowing that, well, I think, I'm pretty good. I think I can get at least 87%. So I'm going to opt in for 87. Why would you do that? It's all or nothing, right? You are in system A or you are in system B. You can't be both at the same time. You're either in or you're out. I testify that if you receive circumcision, and again, the context here is not just that you were incidentally circumcised, but you're doing it for a meritorious purpose, as if you're trying to earn your salvation through accomplishing the work of circumcision. You are now obligated to keep the entirety of the law. That act, and Paul goes into this okay, so let's just be clear here. Paul is an incredibly sarcastic person. Paul is very, very, very sharp-tongued, and he's very surgical, and he will throw things out there that are likely to go right over your head, but then when you start looking at it, you're like, dude, really? Ouch. He's talking about circumcision, and then he throws this throwaway line in there that you're like, wait, hold on. Say that again, Paul? You have been severed from Christ, you who are seeking to be justified from the law, you've fallen from grace. You're talking about just snipping a little bit of the tip? You've been cut off completely. That severed from Christ, he's playing off of the idea of circumcision. You're just going to cut a little bit off, you're cut off completely. That little cut cuts the whole thing. And it doesn't really come across quite the same way for us, both culturally and in English. But culturally, when he's speaking into that Jewish legalistic context and the way he words it in the Greek, he's making a loose, kind of almost tongue-in-cheek comparison between circumcision. Is that important to you? that cuts the whole deal. Like you're completely cut off then. And he comes back to that again in a little bit more of a forceful way in a little bit, which is very funny. For we through the Spirit by faith are awaiting the hope of righteousness, not through the law by works, through the Spirit by faith. Now again, Paul's, as we keep going through this letter, we're kind of getting really close to the end, but this is like, we're bringing all of these ideas to their culmination, right? We, through the Spirit, by faith, and again, the contrast there would be through the law by works. Through the Spirit by faith, we are awaiting the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any meaning, but faith working through love. Now, this is almost like, okay, so if you're into literature, you understand foreshadowing. Paul's kind of foreshadowing chapter 6, verse 15. I'm going to cover it more in depth there, but this idea of circumcision and uncircumcision being both irrelevant, that is such a huge thing in Paul, okay? You are running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? And here's how I like to think about that. When I was younger, like 15, 16, 17, that's the age that I was surfing competitively and professionally. And I was not following the Lord. I was not serving the Lord then. And my friends and I were trouble. Like we were heavily problematic kids. And when it says you were running well, who hindered you? I remember we were heading to the beach. We were surfing. We were on the North Shore. Do you know where Pipeline is? Pipeline? Yeah, it's a surf spot. There's a specific surf spot called Pipeline. It's like one of the most famous surf spots on Oahu. We were going to go surf pipe, and my buddies and I were all running down the beach, and my friend Flynn was right in front of me. And I did that thing where like he was running to the beach where I kicked his leg. He was running well, but somebody hindered him. He was very upset with me. And he did get me back, and we're not going to talk about that, but there's definitely retaliation involved. It's definitely not a lunch conversation. I'll just tell you, so a couple of days later, we were surfing Velziland, which is another surf spot on Oahu, and I had my surfboard down. I'd set it down on the sand next to me, and I was putting my leash on, so my board is next to me, and he stood over my board, and he pooped on my surfboard. He like shook a turd out of his surf shorts onto my board. I was like, look, for context, we were all just very problematic people. Maybe a little bit too autobiographical, sorry. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? I imagine if the Christian walk is like, if you're thinking about it as a walk and you're walking in pursuit of the Lord, it's like somebody coming up behind you and kicking your leg. So you do that thing where you like trip. Like who's kicking your feet out from underneath you as you're walking after the Lord? Like why is it happening? And think about the ways in which you can hinder those around you. In what ways are you helping somebody along their walk as they run after the Lord? How are you being a good running partner? And in what ways are you hindering those around you from following after the Lord? How are you kicking somebody's feet out from underneath them? Like that's a really like soul-searching kind of a question. Like you really need to like think in your friend groups, are you spurring each other on further and further and further to the gospel? Or are you hindering each other? My friends and I, as non-Christian surfers, were definitely hindering each other in every possible way. We were horrible people. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but man, were we absolutely horrible people. Okay. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion did not come from him who calls you. if you are hindering other people, is that an impulse that comes from God? Does God give you the inclination to hinder other believers from following him? What's the alternative? No, but if it didn't come from God, where does that impulse come from? Either the devil or your flesh, both are bad answers. It's either carnal or it's demonic. Like, is that the kind of person you want to be? Here's my friend. They're the most carnally demonic person I know. I would encourage you not to pursue a life that is described or characterized by carnal or demonic behavior. Is that fair? And then Paul drops this line, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Okay, I want to turn to Matthew 13 because I really want to lean into this for a minute. I want to clear up what I think are two misconceptions that people often have about the Bible. The first one is the mustard seed. You guys all like the mustard seed? It's the smallest of all the seeds, right?
Not the smallest, but it's pretty small. It's the smallest of like spelling seeds.
Yeah. In Matthew 13:31, he presented another parable, saying to them, the kingdom of heaven is like the mustard seed, which a man took and sowed into his field. It's smaller than all the other seeds of the garden, but when it's full grown, it's larger than any of the garden plants. It becomes like a tree so that the birds of the air can come and nest in its branches. And as Christians, we've equated like your faith should be like a mustard seed. And we've made that mean that just a little bit of faith can do great big things, right? I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about. Because this kind of mustard that they were dealing with was a death knell to a farmer. If you got mustard in your garden, it was pervasive. It would permeate the whole. It would choke out everything else. I don't care what you were growing, now you're growing mustard. I don't care what your crop was. If mustard gets in there, it's now mustard, and all of it's mustard. Sorry?
Just like adding a banana to like a fruit smoothie. You can add as much as you want, but the second you put a banana in there.
Now it's banana. Yep. It's the same thing, or like peanut butter. If you put peanut butter in a smoothie, I don't care what flavor it was, now it's a peanut butter smoothie. Which is good, but it's not anything else now. Now it's peanut butter. But mustard in a garden, it takes over. And so faith should be the same way. When you add faith to your life, whatever else was there, it's faith now. I think that's what Jesus is teaching. He's not focusing so much on the insignificance of the initial seed. I think he's talking about the fact that the mustard plant pervades the whole. It becomes pervasive. You can't get rid of it. It takes over everything. Again, you may have had a garden growing like rosemary or sage or something, but you get a little bit of mustard in there even by accident, and now it's mustard now, all of it. It will choke out everything else. Nothing else will even grow there. It is now totally mustard, and it doesn't matter how much you cut it. It doesn't matter how much you weed it. The roots go down, and the roots get everywhere, and you have to rip up everything and burn the whole thing. Mustard is there. Like, it's not, you don't come back from that. But I think that's what Jesus is saying. The kingdom of heaven is like mustard. Once the gospel gets into you, you're saved now. It should permeate the whole. There's no part of you that's left over that's not given to God. Just like there's no part of the garden that can survive a mustard invasion. When faith comes into your life, it should be so pervasive that nothing else survives. Everything else is choked out. Everything else is drowned out. Every other sinful desire or passion or pursuit, none of that matters anymore. It's all gone because faith just takes over everything. And now you are saved. The end. Just like mustard, when you get into the garden, everything else is gone. And then the next parable that he gives, he spoke to them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. Leaven is often equated to what in the scripture? Why does it say the kingdom of heaven is like sin? Doesn't that just not make sense? Everyone always says, well, leaven is a type of sin in the Bible. No, it's not. It's a type of influence. And it's often equated with sin because sin is very influential. But it's not only a type of sin, it's a type of influence. Because the kingdom of heaven is just like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 units of flour until all of it was leavened. Has anybody done any baking? You put leaven into dough, it's leavened. It's not kind of leavened, it's all leavened, right? It doesn't just it permeates the whole. You can't have a loaf of bread that's half leavened and half of it's not. The kingdom of heaven is either in you or it is not in you. And so when you understand leaven like that, when you understand mustard like that, do you see how these two things are ultimately saying this? These two parables, they're ultimately saying the same thing. The kingdom of heaven is like mustard. When it gets in you, it chokes out everything else. It is in you. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven. When it's in you, that's it. That's what you are now. You're saved. You're not kind of saved. You're not sort of saved and mostly saved and saved on Sunday, but the rest of the week, whatever. You either are or you are not a child of God. And so when Paul says in Galatians here, the passage that we're looking at, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. If you actually have the legitimate truth of the gospel in you, that should be enough to permeate the whole. There should be enough that once the gospel infects you, you are now infected with the gospel. You are gospel positive forever. Does that make sense? Just like mustard. You get a little mustard in your garden, that garden is done. It is now a mustard garden. I don't care what you thought you were growing, now you're growing mustard. When the gospel gets in you, the intent of the gospel is that it chokes everything else out. Nothing else can coexist with the genuine gospel. So this idea of legalistic requirements or demands, this works-based, law-based sort of like trying to earn your spot in the kingdom of heaven, it cannot coexist with the gospel. They don't coincide. They're mutually exclusive. One does not allow the presence of the other. And again, if you have a lump of dough, it is either leavened or it is not leavened. But it's not kind of leavened, right? In logic, it's known as the principle of excluded middle. Here's another analogy that would help you understand that. If you were to call my wife and ask her, hey, are you pregnant? And she said, well, kind of. Would that help? Is that a valid answer? Are you pregnant? Kinda. I'm a little pregnant. Whoa. You either are yes pregnant or no pregnant. There's not like kind of pregnant. You either are yes, I'm saved, or no, I am not saved. You're not kind of saved. Does that make sense? So a little leaven leavens the whole lump. If the gospel is in you, it's in you. If it's not in you, it's not in you. And I really wanted to get to that passage in Matthew because, again, people genuinely or generally, they equate leaven as if it's always a type of sin in the Bible. It is often a type of sin in the Bible, but it's not always. In Matthew 13:33, Jesus himself says the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. It can't be like sin, it's like influence. Even when Jesus was in the Gospel of John, he said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And they're like, oh, does that mean we didn't bring enough bread? And he's like, no, dummies. The leaven of the Pharisees is their doctrine, their teaching, that which they influence other people with. Okay? So leaven is often a type of sin. It's not exclusively a type of sin. It is actually in the Bible a type of influence or teaching, but generally that which influences others. And usually it's negative because sin is very influential, right? It says in 1 Corinthians, beware, bad character corrupts good morals. You don't put a good apple in a bunch of bad apples hoping the bad apples will get better. The bad apples corrupt the good apple. Okay, so a little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in you in the Lord that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you, whoever this person is, he will bear his own judgment, whoever he is. But I, brethren, if I were to still preach circumcision, if Paul is saying, if I were to still preach some version of the gospel that was contingent upon your behavior, your carnal efforts, you through the flesh pleasing God, if I were to still preach circumcision, why am I still getting persecuted? Why are the legalists persecuting me? the stumbling block of the cross would have been abolished. The cross is genuinely a stumbling block. There is nothing more that legalism hates than liberty, right? I wish that, and remember I was saying earlier that Paul has those like little cutting things that he throws out there? Verse 12, I wish those who were troubling you would just mutilate themselves. The preaching circumcision, why don't you just stop at the tip? Just cut the whole thing off. That's in essence what he's saying. It's a little crass, but that's the thrust of Paul. Like, why would you stop there? Why don't you just go all the way, guys? Keep it up. You want to be a little legalistic, go ahead and be all the way legalistic. You want to just cut a little bit, cut the whole thing. Why would you stop? What are you, a coward? Do it, buddy. I double dog dare you. That's kind of what Paul's saying here. Those who are trying to convince you to be legalistic and submit to the rite of circumcision, why would you just stop a little way? Go all the way. Why would you stop with a little bit of legalism? Why don't you swallow the whole law? Why are they stopping at just circumcision? How come they're not going all the way through the entire Levitical code, all, 617 commandments, and obey every single one religiously? Why would you stop partway, go all the way? And again, that was essentially what his argument was. Remember earlier where he says if you, where's that verse? Again, I testify that everyone who receives circumcision, he's under obligation to keep the whole law, right? Earlier in chapter 5. You can't just kind of halfway your way into legalism. It's all or nothing. You are called to freedom, brethren, verse 13. Only do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. So again, we talked about how freedom from a Christian perspective is not the ability to do whatever you want. Freedom, biblically, spiritually speaking, is the ability of God in and through you to do that which you ought to do. Not what you want to do, but that which you ought to do. If you use your volition, your freedom, your free will, to only ever do what you want, you have taken the tool of liberty and you have used it for your own flesh. You've made it an opportunity to satisfy your own desires. Right? So he's saying, don't do that. That's not what freedom is for. That is a misuse of the gift God has given you. You are called to freedom. Do not turn your freedom into an opportunity for the flesh. However, through love, serve one another. Find ways to be productive and help each other instead of just focusing on self. For the entirety of the law, the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in this statement: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And it's funny where he says it's fulfilled in one word, this statement, which he gives like a handful of words, right? But if you were to boil it down to one word, what is the one word that summarizes the whole law? Love. Now, I don't have this in my notes, and I don't have the references. I can probably find them for you if I try really hard later. But there's one of my mentors broke it down this way. He said, there's 3 one-liners that summarize the entirety of the law. This will resonate with you, like even without finding the verses off the top of your head, you'll go, okay, I know what he's talking about. Be loving. Be holy. And be perfect. So, the law says, love your neighbor as yourself. The law also says, be holy as your Father in heaven is holy. Huh? Okay, and then it also says to be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Yeah. So the whole law can be summarized in these 3 statements: be loving, be holy, be perfect. Can we keep, if you boil it down like this, can you keep the law on your own? In your own best efforts, can you pull this off? Even if you broke it down into just 3 things, you still can't do it. And if you accept the law as your means of salvation, you can't just keep some of it. You have to keep all of it. Like, be loving. Okay, most of the time I could probably do that. Be holy. I'm already definitely disqualified. I'm probably disqualified here. I'm definitely disqualified here. And then be perfect. Not even close. I'm at best 1 out of 3. And that 1 out of 3, it's not even a full, it's like 1/3 of 1/3. Like I'm not even like loving most of the time. Right? Like it's not even 50-50. It's like at best, like 33% of the time I'm loving, at best. So if you're trying to keep the law as your means of salvific expression, even if you were to boil the law down into these 3 commandments, could you even do this? And it's all or nothing. So why would you opt for legalism over grace? If God has made a better way, why would you go to this way? Why would anybody want to have a gospel that presents a version of salvation that's dependent on you instead of God? God can do this. Can you do this? Like just not even like, well, I could try. You can't even come close. If you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another. And again, this is one of those places where Paul's throwing it out there like, if you're going to take shots at each other, like, why would you just stop at like taking a couple bites? Just go all the way and just consume each other. Like, just finish the meal. He's almost goading them. Like, if you're going to go a little, go all the way, guys. What are you, coward? He's like trying to push them. You're going to be a little bit legalistic, be all the way legalistic. Like, really lean into it. Because that, like, nobody wants to actually do that, right? Even the legalists, like, well, I mean, that's a little extreme. Paul's like, what are you, like, you sissy? He's like, you can just kind of feel that, like, almost like antagonistic, like, come on, dude, do it. No, really, do it. Try it. You be a little bit legalistic, be really legalistic. All or nothing. You're either in or you're out. None of this halfway nonsense. If you're going to go for it, go for it. And when you put it like that, when you frame it that way, even the legalists are prone to back down and go, well, we're not that. I mean, that's crazy. Paul's like, all of it's crazy. Any of it's crazy. If the extreme example is crazy, you're also crazy for the little bit of the example. For the part, if it's crazy over here, it's crazy here too. But it's less crazy, but it's still crazy. Do you see that? Is less crazy better like than a lot of crazy? Yes, but is it better than no crazy? I'd rather have no crazy, right? If the gospel can be presented as either legalism or grace, and any amount of legalism is crazy, why would you choose crazy over grace? So that's Paul's point. We're going to end early today because I don't want to jump into this next section because we don't have enough time to do it justice. But we'll finish up the rest of chapter 5 and all of chapter 6 tomorrow. Any questions about any of this stuff so far? Are you guys tracking with this? Is this like...
That's really good.
Okay. Are you, is this a version of the gospel, this version of the gospel that I think is very biblical, is this something that you guys are already very familiar with and it's repeat information, or do you feel like this is like new, like, oh my gosh, I've never seen it that way?
Well, I really liked how you explained the Matthew passage. Honestly, that was really important to me.
Okay.
So that was amazing.
You said legalists are trying to make you dependent on their rules.
Yes.
Going back to that conversation, this might be out of context, but my question is like, I grew up in a homeschooled home, and it was very conservative.
Mhm.
So I was taught as a woman and as a child that God spoke through my parents. I know this isn't technically the legalistic aspect, but would you see that as a red flag leaning that direction, making me dependent? Because I felt like I was taught to be dependent on them, and I couldn't understand the voice of God myself.
As a child, I think that there can be, that's heavily manipulatable, but it's not inherently manipulative in and of itself. I think that it very easily lends itself to manipulation. But as a child, I mean, it even says in Galatians, when you are a child, you are under a tutor to lead you to Christ. So as a child, then yeah, I think that there is a sense in which your parents are the authority that you listen to and you glean from. Now, can that be easily manipulated into something that's unhealthy? Yes, it can. I don't know your particular situation or your parents, so I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, your parents are fine. But I'm also not going to sit here and say they were definitely manipulating. I don't know.
I think the main reason that I asked that question is because of the perspective that it creates as you're growing spiritually. Because if you grow up believing that someone else has to correct your thinking, then when you are grown up, you're not going to have confidence in believing that you know what the heck you're talking about.
Well, okay, so without even knowing that about what you're saying about your own background, think back to how I opened this class on day one. One of the first things I said is, yeah, ask questions, challenge me, disagree with me. I also said, I don't believe there's such a thing as a junior Holy Spirit. If I believe that I have the Spirit of God in and through me, and if you're saved, I have to believe you have the Spirit of God in and through you. And so as much as I believe that I have the authority to speak the word of God by the Spirit of God, I have to assume that you have the exact same level of authority that I have. Not less, not diminished. The only difference between where I'm at and where you're at is time. I've been doing this longer. That doesn't make me better, it just makes me older. Okay?
How would you go about teaching that idea that God, like, even like teaching your kids, being like, yes, as a child, I can speak into your life and give you guidance on God, but not break down their confidence in hearing, like you said, no junior Holy Spirit.
So as my kids start getting, okay, this is a really interesting question, okay? And I've been very intentional about this, and I've been very open about it too. So about 6 or 7 years ago, as my son, who is now 19, was kind of going into that like high school teenage years, one thing that I know for sure is when you hit those like teenage years, and this is universal for boys and girls, once you start hitting those older teenage years, mom and dad are stupid. They don't know anything. Why would I listen to my stupid parents? You know, you get that rebellious, like, I'm off on my own. I don't have to listen to you part of life. So what I did, and I was very intentional about this, is I identified the handful of guys. There's about 3 guys that I was like, these guys are going to be the leaders of the youth group. Like, they were kind of like older high school, younger college age, but I was like, these are the guys that God's calling into this ministry. And I started heavily investing in and discipling those guys. It was a guy named Mario, a guy named Will, and a guy named Trevor. And I just poured into them. And what ended up happening is Mario ended up being the youth pastor, Will was the assistant, and Trevor is now the worship leader at our church. So I picked 3, I bet on 3 horses, and I won on all 3. But when my sons got to that age where mom and dad are stupid and I don't want to listen to you anymore, guess who they were listening to? And guess what they were telling my kids? The exact same message. And so the reason I say that is because, as kids, you have to be aware of this, but a little too late for you now, right? But as an adult who's going into that phase of life where you're going to start having kids, hopefully, you know, maybe you'll get married or whatever, what you need to understand is that that period of time is definitely coming. Your kids will somehow they will outgrow you. And that's not something to be afraid of or to fight. It's something to prepare for. It's something to prepare both your environment and your children. Because I knew that was coming with my kids. I knew it was coming. And so I prepared them to be able to receive from a source that wasn't me. And I prepared the environment that they were in. I was in a position where I was able to mentor and to disciple these young men. And so as my sons gravitated to these young men, I knew that my sons were going to be getting a message that I would have approved of. Because where do you think they got their message from? From me. So my sons would come home, and I would tell my sons something like, hey, you know, X, Y, or Z, and like, whatever, Dad, you're stupid. I mean, they weren't disrespectful like that, but that was kind of the attitude, right? But then they would come home and like, oh, wow, Mario taught this thing at youth group tonight, and oh my gosh, it was like, it just changed my life, and like God spoke to me, and I'm like, Mario's verbatim quoting me, and I told you that yesterday. And when I said it was so dumb, and now Mario said, and all of a sudden it's like the wisdom of God, it was amazing. I told you the exact same thing verbatim 24 hours ago. But to me, it's like, yeah, I knew that was coming. I knew that my son wasn't going to listen to me. And I could tell him something, he'd be like, whatever, Dad. But then Mario could say the same thing. He's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Oh my gosh, yeah, okay, praise the Lord, brother. Do you see what I'm saying? And so I wasn't afraid of that coming. I wasn't scared of that. I prepared for it. I prepared my sons and I prepared their environment. And so I am fully aware that parents have a hard time with that because they want to be the authority in their children's life forever. But that's not normal. That's not natural. That's not even biblical. And as children grow up, I did the same thing. When I was 17, man, I couldn't listen. I didn't listen to a single thing my dad told me when I was 17. My dad was so dumb. Like I couldn't, like, what was he talking about? And then I hit like 25 or 30 and I was like, oh, my dad was incredibly wise. And I came back around. And so my dad and I were able to, like, at the end of his life, I was coming back to him and recognizing his wisdom. But there's that gap in the middle where your parents are so stupid. Like, raise your hands if you went through that phase where mom and dad are dumb and I can't stand them. Be honest.
Mine was more complicated.
I respect that.
Everybody has complicated.
Yeah, I respect that. But you can,
I didn't think they were stupid, just like some of their choices were not.
you didn't agree with. Because you're testing your own freedom and individualistic reality. Like you're kind of going out on your own and you're becoming autonomous. That's what happens when you hit those ages. You start pushing into that autonomy, which is healthy. Kids are supposed to do that. And parents have a hard time accepting that. Now, if your parents were more aware and more sensitive to that, your transition may have been easier. But the reality is that transition still happens at some point. It may have happened differently for you,
It was a lot of chaos, and like I was trying to manage the chaos.
and I respect that. But all I'm trying to say is that that is a reality that should be prepared for, not fought against. Does that work? Okay, now we're definitely over time, so we're going to pray and you guys can go. Lord, thank you for this time for us to be able to get together and to look into your word. Lord, as you continue to speak to us through your word, may we hear your voice loud and clear. Amen.